First off, I would like to express my most thankful gratitude to you, Gerald, and the organizers in Singapore. I feel very humbled. I mean, I know the word humble has been hijacked by LinkedIn. It says I'm humbled to speak at this conference. Often it means the opposite of humility. Like, look, I'm in the company of great people, and of course I'm proud, but I also feel humility to be in the company of great names in this new field, computational legal studies. It's always a challenge to give a keynote. I know that Kevin Ashley and Daniel Katz are already doing the vision thing. So I thought I would look for something entertaining, and especially because it's the end of the day in Singapore. Here in Belgium is the start of an early cloudy morning. So typically, probably the rain is going to start coming soon. But first, I will try to share my screen. Right. Good. I hope you can see my screen. I will switch to full screen. So I will manage to do so. Right. Oh, sorry. I'm going to start again. Right. Okay. So I want to tell you about ongoing research we're doing on state third-party solutions in international adjudication, and I mean what we've been doing with using computational legal methods. This is work that I've been humbled to do with Mikhail Ovadek and Timothy Yuchong Young. Sorry, I cannot move my slides. Okay, now it comes, right. So I'm first going to tell you a bit about our data itself, and then I will take you on a journey into two research questions we've been trying to answer using this data set. The first is about the role of cultural affinity in interstate relations, and I promise I will also tell you something about the Eurovision Song Contest. And then I will turn to another research question, which is more about the cure for intercultural biases. And I will conclude with some remarks on this research, but also on the use of computational legal studies in these computational legal methods in these kind of research. So countries, sovereign states, regularly intervene as interested third party in international adjudication. And this is the case on the WTO dispute settlement body, for example. And there is a large body of research investigating these interventions. We also see states submitting observations before the International Court of Justice and the European Court of Justice. And I'm going to focus on this latter court. So on the European Court of Justice, member states, each member state of the European Union has the right to intervene either in support of the state party to the case or in support of the EU institution that is party to the case. This can happen in two types of proceedings. infringement proceedings which are brought by the European Commission against a member state, and in annulment proceedings which are brought by a member state against the European Commission. What is interesting about these disputes, among other things, is that they cover a wide variety of legal issues, from wastewater treatment to market liberalization or environmental protection. So in our research, we call a friendly intervention an intervention, in support of another member state, and a full intervention when an intervention, a third-party intervention, is against, or is in support of a new institution against a member state. And what you see here in the two panels, the upper panel, you see the member states that have issued friendly and full submissions. And you see that, for example, France, Great Britain, and Finland have been among the most active. In the lower panel, you see the member states that have received submissions when they were the main party to a case. You see that, for example, Germany has received a lot of, DE, this is a Deutschland for Germany, that Germany has received a lot of friendly submissions, and a couple of, some unfriendly ones. You see that, for example, Spain and the UK, Great Britain, have received more hostile submissions than friendly ones. So there are differences in terms of popularity. It seems Germany is quite popular in litigation before the Court of Justice, but Spain and the UK are somewhat less so. So the first question you wanted to answer with this data is whether cultural affinity can affect interstate relations. There's been some work in economics about cultural biases and trust. This is from research about how managers in various EU countries, when the UK was still part of the EU, the extent to which they trust managers from other EU member states. What you can see here clearly is that German managers are the most trusted, whereas Italians are the least trusted. But you see, for example, if you look at France and French managers and British managers, you see that French managers are among the least trusted by British managers, but the French reciprocate. They also tend to distrust British managers. There's a famous quote by the Duke of Wellington that we always have been, we are, and I hope that we always shall be detested in France. We'll see whether that is also reflected in the data. More systematically, there is work in social psychology about intercultural biases. And this is, this research, there's one prominent model in social psychology, which is called the Stereotype content model. And this model assumes that the perception of other cultures and people from other cultures, other countries, is shaped by two basic underlying variables. One is competence and the other is warmth. Typically, we tend to see people within our group, so in-group members, as being both competent and warm, but there are other cultures which sometimes see as being competent, standing for competence, but not warmth, and others we tend to associate with warmth but incompetence. What you see here is that, for example, the Germans are typically seen as being competent but low on warmth, although they tend to see, because in Italy you see how Germans see themselves, they tend to see themselves as warmer than other people perceive them to be. But you have also, what is also interesting is that the deviation between self-perception and perception by others can be quite stark. For example, if you look at the French tend to see themselves as high both on competence and warmth, but others tend to see the French as somewhat more aloof and somewhat less competent. Belgium is also an interesting case because they are the champions of self-deprecation, so they see themselves as being very aloof, but others see them as somewhat, warmer. So this is work from a social psychologist. Unfortunately, I've been trying to get hold of the data sets they collected, but most of this research was done 10 years ago when they didn't follow the practice of saving and archiving the data sets. So I'm in the process of running, in fact, new experiments to generate new data. But here is we use network analysis to look at the patterns of submissions. And we also conducted some community detection to see how the countries cluster together. So this is the Friends network. And here you see that clearly there is a South European community with Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, and Greece. So for example, you see that Spain is the strongest supporter of France. And there is a more northwestern community with Great Britain, Germany, the Netherlands, Ireland, Belgium, but also Austria. And the Nordic, as well as a Nordic community. You see that Finland, for example, is the strongest supporter of Sweden, along with Denmark. And there's also an Eastern European community. By the way, I mean, these results, I mean, we have also tried other clustering methods, and we tend to find the same communities, the same clusters within all these various clustering methods. The phone networks is also quite interesting. I mean, if you look here, if you focus on France and Great Britain, you see that it seems that the dream of Duke of Wellington has been largely fulfilled. Maybe that was the reason why the UK eventually left the EU. The one question is how to measure, if you want to determine whether these patterns are driven by cultural affinity, you need a measure of cultural affinity. And so many researchers have turned to data from the Eurovision Song Contest, which is, I think, great, except maybe for the music, but some might disagree. This is a network with some community clustering constructed from the Eurovision network. And here, the data has been purged from single fixed effects. So what is left is, the tendency of countries to support each other. And so what you clearly see also here, some communities that make intuitive sense. I mean, it is well known in the Eurovision that Cyprus and Greece tend to support each other, but you also see, like, in the lower left part of the network, that France clusters with Portugal and Spain. I was a bit more surprised with the position of Italy in the upper right part of the network here. But we tried to use the data from Eurovision to see whether it can predict patterns of support in our data. And so we run some regression models. And here are our preliminary results. And you can clearly see here that support in the Eurovision contest is positively associated with friendly submissions. This is evidence, we believe, that cultural affinity also affects interstate relations. Maybe it's sad, but maybe there is a cure for intercultural prejudices, and that could be trade. There is the idea that trade might be a cure for cultural prejudices is a very old argument, and it goes back to liberal Enlightenment thinkers. It's sometimes referred to as the commercial peace hypothesis. So the more you trade with other other countries, the more you are at peace with them. And there's a very large peace economics and international relations literature that has tried to demonstrate, determine whether this is also true empirically, sometimes with also mixed results. But the assumption in this literature is typically that the theoretical assumption is that states weigh both the costs and benefits of trade and policy and foreign policy alignment. And another important assumption is that trade can constrain the behavior, the foreign policy conduct of sovereign states, because sovereign states retain the formal power to unilaterally block trade flows. So if another country does something I don't like, I can always block trade flows to try and persuade this country to revert or to converge to my foreign policy preferences. And I think these assumptions may seem to make obvious, sense, because we all see in international relations examples where countries try to use economic coercion to change the behavior of other countries. We've seen it with China, and there's a lot of literature suggesting that, for example, African and Latin American countries that trade more with China tend to align more closely to converge towards Chinese foreign policy position. And of course, in the current news cycle, there's a lot of talk about all the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia as an attempt to put pressure on Russia to stop its attack on Ukraine. But if you go back to the Enlightenment thinkers, they also thought about another mechanism which has more to do with a socialization. So it's not just a rational calculus, and we see that the current news cycle suggests that not everyone is always rational in international relations. But here, so the idea is more that commerce, because the more you trade, the more you get in touch with other people, so that this can cure you from your prejudices. So it's not a pure rational cost-benefit calculation. But of course, this is very tricky to demonstrate empirically, because whereas the causal mechanisms differ, you have the same explanatory variable and the same predictions when it comes to the effect of trade. But the European Union offers what you could say is almost a natural experiment, because the European Union is a self-contained legal order, in the sense that the terms of trade in the EU are enshrined in EU treaties, but these treaties don't rely on self-enforcement by national governments. They are enforced by a supranational body, the European Commission, in cooperation with domestic courts. So, and membership of the European Union entails a strict prohibition on, self-help countermeasures against other member states. So, when a country is in the EU, the threat of trade sanctions is off the table. So it's not a weapon they can use against other member states. So this makes the EU an interesting laboratory to see whether this socialization hypothesis might hold true. Now, a challenge is a challenge we face in this research is that, especially if you come from like the literature on the WTO settlement body, you might think that in fact, even in the EU, member states are primarily, when it comes to education, motivated by the desire to preserve market access. And it's true, European integration is to a large extent about the internal market. But the good thing about the EU is that it's not only about the internal market, it's also about issues that have little or nothing to do with market access. For example, when you think about wastewater treatment or environmental protection, these measures or these areas, these policy areas, have little to do with market access. So we use natural language processing methods to first determine the policy area a case relates to, and also the distance between the case and these and the internal market and internal market issues. So for this, we use a clustering method, but instead of using the typical bag of words topic modeling approach to document clustering, I mean, I've done a lot of research using probabilistic topic modeling on EULO data and EULO cases, but for this paper, we relied on a distributed approach. So we used the top 2vec model, which is already implemented in a Python library. And the way this approach works, I mean, it starts out very much like your doc2vec approach. So you learn from the corpus joint document and word embeddings. But in the next step, you use dimensionality reduction before identifying the clusters of dense documents, and then you use these clusters to identify like the words. I mean, you determine the centroid of each cluster of dense documents, and you use this to construct your topic vector. So in the end, you have vectors both for words, documents, and topics. And it becomes quite handy in this kind of work, because then you have topics, and these topics tend to be better than the ones you obtain from an LDA or other bag of words approaches, because it's based on a distributed approach. In fact, you can even plug BERT embeddings, so embed pre-trained embeddings from transformer models into the algorithm. But for this one, we trained the embeddings on the corpus itself. It's what worked best. But what is also great is that you can construct a vector to determine how far a case, a document is from this vector. And because here we want to determine whether the distance to internal market issues makes a difference or not, we constructed an internal market vector. I should say that, in fact, our vector looks more like this, because the language of instruction of the Code of Justice is French, so there are more rulings available in French than in other languages. So we eventually trained our model on the French translations. So for all, I mean, this is these are the words that are closest to our internal market vector. but oh, I thought I also had a plot to show you. You can also, as a way of to determine the phase validity of your vector, you can also look at the distance between your internal market vector and your topics. And what we found is that this internal market vector is very close to the topics relating to competition, market liberalization, state subsidies, and the farthest from topics relating to environmental protection, wastewater treatment, so topics that have less to do with the internal market. And so our identification strategy relies on, we use as our explanatory variable lagged trade values, so the past values of trade to explain current interstate cooperation. So the likelihood that a member state will submit a friendly submission in the case. So we run this analysis at the case country level. We also have a few controls in our analysis, such as DIAD and year fixed effects, GDP, geographic distance, government ideology, position, the powers of the member states involved in the case, in the process, and also we also control the procedure. So our, as you can see here, our results suggest that past trade is positively associated with friendly submissions, which is consistent with our hypothesis that trade is a channel for interstate socialization and can lead to greater policy convergence. So with this, I come to the conclusion of this talk. So we do find preliminary evidence that cultural affinity can affect interstate relations. We also find that trade might be a potential cure for prejudices. The European Union was created in the 1950s with the aim of creating a single market, and in the hope that this would bring, an ever closer union among the peoples of Europe. So maybe, this is research that suggests that, especially in these times of acute international crisis, that there is some light at the end of the tunnel. But I hope this research also demonstrates the use and what you can achieve, and then the added value of computational legal methods to explore complex legal dynamics, such as the effect of trade or cultural affinity on interstate cooperation. So with this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to questions if there are any.
Right. Thank you, Professor Jeff, for that really comprehensive talk. It's really a lot of things to take in. I wonder if people have questions. Yes, Corina.
Hi, Arthur. Ms. Corina. Thank you for the talk. It was great to see some data being munched on the screen. So I have many questions, but I'll just start with the ones relating to methods, I guess. So you mentioned that you did community detection, which might be a little bit surprising given that we have very few nodes in the network. So I was wondering whether you also looked at more like microstructure things, so like doing some motive analysis, maybe with some like sociological theory in the background. Like, do you find evidence of structural balance or hierarchy within these support networks or triadic closure, stuff like that?
in the plots you've seen, we don't display all the nodes because for some member states there are fewer interventions, but also because then the networks look messy. So we've shown like the most the nodes for which we have more observations. But no, I mean, we've done various types of analysis, even you know, multi-level network analysis. Yeah, I'm not sure I really see what the extra steps you were suggesting would really highlight. But I mean, we've tried like many, I mean, all the available community detection algorithms, and they tend to lead the same results. I've also shown the results of various other clustering methods. So I would say we're quite confident about the clustering.
Yeah, maybe as a follow-up to clarify, I wasn't questioning the community detection. I was asking, have you looked at the micro level, like neighborhood structure of the relationships that you observe, in the sense that if one country is a strong supporter of country, like country A strongly supports B, B strongly supports C, is there a heightened probability that A will also support C, for example?
Right. I think this is what you're referring to, what we call peer effects.
Ah, okay.
Like if your peer, right. I think we've done some preliminary analysis for this, but we haven't found, I mean, in fact, this research started more, in fact, looking at peer effects, but we were much less convinced that there are, in fact, peer effects in the data than we initially thought.
Thanks. Oh, I mean, I think if other people have questions, feel free to stop me. Just now, one question on the data that you investigated. So I found it very creative in the sense that, like, the way that you brought different data sources together. One thing that came to mind that's perhaps even more obvious than the trade data is kind of stuff like leaning party of government, which also changes over time, and the alignment in that. So have you looked at that and how well you can use that to predict the support networks?
You mean the ideology of the governments?
Yes, for example.
Right. In fact, we thought that this would, because this is one of our control variables, and we thought that it would have some explanatory power, but it turns out not to have much. And that you know, a left-wing government is as likely to ally with a right-wing government as with another left-wing government. So maybe this has something to do with the way ideology is measured, and maybe measures, you know, like, I mean, the typical measure used in political science is the party manifesto project data set. And maybe this data is not as good as people assume, but if it is good, if you can believe that the data provides a good measure, then it suggests that ideology doesn't play much of a role in these disputes.
And have you looked at like the support split by topic, and like, do you have a hunch as to whether that's the same across issues?
Well, in the table, I mean, the regression table I've shown you is what we've, I mean, we have models that control for topics, but also if you include these internal market vector, I mean, you can include it in the model as an interaction factor. And it is not significant. This shows that even for issues that are farther for the, from the internal market, so member states are as likely to intervene. So there is no interaction with the distance from the internal market. And of course, the results are robust to controlling for the topics.
Thank you.
So I have a question which I'm really curious about. I'm curious about the Eurovision Song Contest. I'm just wondering, firstly, how did you get the data? And secondly, is there a correlation between the Eurovision Support Network and the State Intervention Friend of Foe Network? In the sense that if they are more likely to support each other in a song contest, are they also more likely to support each other or to go against each other in the state intervention sense?
Sorry, I mean, I got the first question, but not the second one, please.
Right. Sorry, the second question was about the correlations between the Eurovision Song Network and the State Intervention Network.
Yes.
We say that if one country is more likely to support the other in the song contest, are they also more likely to support the other in state interventions and vice versa?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I will start with the last question. Yeah, it's what we said. I mean, I've shown you our regression results. We're not claiming that there is of course, a direct causal relationship between support for the Euro Song Contest and interstate cooperation as measured by third-party interventions, because we use the Euro Song Contest data as a proxy for cultural affinity. We also control for other measures of cultural proximity, like one measure often used is Hofstede, and even controlling for this, I mean, the Euro Song Contest remains significantly associated with interstate support in dispute before the Court of Justice. Now, to answer your first question, I mean, you can find the data on, I think it's my co-author who collected the data. You can find it on I mean, you can scrape it from the Euro Song Contest website, of course, but also from, I think, Wikipedia, but also some researchers. I mean, there's quite a bit of research on Eurovision now, especially by economists. And so, I mean, the data is relatively easy to get hold of. Oh, by the way, I mean, if you know of any data set or data that could be used to look at interstate, intercultural affinity, please, I'm interested. Please write to me.
Is there any question from the online participants? If not, I hope you don't mind if I ask a slightly broader question. I am, given the conference theme, I think one thing we have been thinking about here and probably also amongst the online community is, where do you see the field of computational legal studies heading, and where do you see are some of the difficult problems that you hope more people can tackle?
Well, I think when we think about the field of computational legal studies, I think in fact it's a broad field, which I would say encompasses two strands of research. One focuses more on, I would say, legal automation, the automation of legal tasks in the legal services industry, like contract review and so on. Or in the judiciary, e-justice. And there is another strand of research which tries to answer more theoretical questions in the social scientific sense. And I think the answer differs for these two fields, although at the technical level, I think some questions really cut through these two strands of research. I think we've made a lot of progress in modeling language with transformer models. In law, I hope to see more also training of transformers for long sequences, because in the legal field, we often deal with long documents. BERT, for example, only works for small sequences. And that's often an obstacle to using more advanced NLP methods for many tasks, because dealing with long sequences. But I also hope that we reach soon the next level of language modeling, and that we can incorporate more of the context of documents. Meaning is not only about words and syntax; it's also about the context in which we usher, in which we speak, in which we write. I have a colleague here in Leuven who is at the computer science department, who works on incorporating in the next gen NLP models also visual information, audio information, to develop models that don't only capture the linguistic signs, but also all aspects that matter in human communication. I hope that, and I think that will bring the field to a new level once we develop such models.